Under the programme order of 18th March, any message from the Lords in respect of the safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill may be considered forthwith, without any question put, and proceedings shall be brought to a conclusion no later than 1 hour after their commencement. A message has been received from the Lords that the Lords do not insist on an amendment to the safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill to which the Commons have disagreed, but propose an amendment in lieu to which they desire the agreement of the Commons, and they do not insist on another amendment to which the Commons have disagreed. The Lords' amendment and a government motion relating to it are available online and in the Vote Office.
Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill. Consideration of Lord's message today. Now.
Before we move to consideration of the Lord's message received today, I can confirm that nothing in the Lord's message engages Commons financial privilege. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with the Lord's Amendment 3J. Minister Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much indeed, and it's a great pleasure to open this debate, and I beg to move that this House disagrees with the Lord's Amendments 3J. Madam Speaker, may I start by echoing and agreeing with my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing and Shoreham, who started his own speech during the last debate just a very short number of hours ago by agreeing with what the opposition spokesman said about there being nothing new to say, just pitying that he then spent 40 minutes saying nothing new. I don't intend to emulate what the Shadow Minister did on the last occasion, because, in fact, turning to the Amendments 3J, it's very clear that they're almost identical to the previous amendments that we debated and that this House rejected just a short number of hours ago. It's in two parts, inserting when the Rwanda may be treated as a safe country and inserting when Rwanda must cease to be treated as a safe country. The amendment singular is not necessary. Just to confirm, turning to the amendment from the noble Lord, Lord Anderson of Ipswich, I will make clear once again that we will only ratify the treaty when all necessary implementation is in place. The implementation will be kept under review by the Independent Monitoring Committee, and Clause 9 of the bill makes clear when the bill and the provisions come into force. To confirm, Madam Deputy Speaker, implementation continues at pace. I can confirm again that on the 21st of March, the Rwandan Senate passed their legislation ratifying the treaty. And once again, as I confirmed this afternoon, on the 19th of April, just last Friday, the Rwandan Parliament passed their domestic legislation to implement their new asylum system. In an attempt to reassure my right honourable and learned friend, as we have made clear, if the Monitoring Committee were to raise any issues to the Joint Committee, standing members of the Joint Committee are senior officials of the government of this country and of the government of Rwanda, and the government will, of course, listen. And I remind my right honourable friend and honourable friends that it will be up to the Independent Monitoring Committee to raise issues at any point. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is nothing new in these amendments. These amendments have already been rejected. Enough is enough. I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3J. Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. So for several months now, the Prime Minister has been ferociously attacking their lordships in the other place, simply for doing their constitutional duty by seeking to revise and improve this bill. And tonight we see the evidence of why it is so important that they did just that. And I would like to put on record my thanks to the noble Lord Brown for his tenacity in securing a significant concession, and it is a concession, which promises that Afghans in the UK who have put forward credible claims of evidence of a connection to Afghan specialist units will not be deported to Rwanda. Now, this hasn't gone as far as we would want it to, but at least the government, albeit begrudgingly, has inched towards doing the right thing by standing by some of those who so bravely stood by us in the face of the Taliban. We owe them a debt of gratitude, and it is a great shame that the government, and in particular the Prime Minister, first turned its back on those we promised sanctuary to by cancelling flights from Pakistan, then spent months resisting Lord Brown's efforts to prevent these brave Afghans from being sent to Rwanda, despite repeatedly being pressed to do so by our armed forces to do the right thing, and now, finally, having to be dragged kicking and screaming to where we find ourselves this evening. Even this afternoon, the Minister's response to my honourable friend, the member for Walthamstow, who's not in a place at the moment, was revealing. She raised in detail a case of her constituent who supported British efforts but whose family was stuck in Afghanistan, and yet the Minister couldn't even bring himself to reassure my honourable friend that he would meet with her or even look into the specifics of that case. That's why it'll be so important for us to hold the government to account on this concession, because it's so difficult to take what ministers say at face value. Turning now to the amendment in the name of Lord Anderson, I find it staggering that ministers still haven't conceded on this very basic point, that this House is not just trying to legislate that Rwanda is safe now, in other words, that white is black and black is white, but that Rwanda is safe in perpetuity. The noble Lord Anderson was right in what he said in the other place this evening, that this is a post-truth bill. You cannot possibly legislate for something which is in the lap of the gods. Now, I spoke earlier about the dangerous and turbulent world in which we live, and the threat that at any point the situation in Rwanda could change radically, just as it could in any other country. But let us not forget that just 6 years ago, I will give way.
The Labour leadership is its inconsistency. But will he just confirm that in the last decade, Rwanda is seen to be so unsafe that the UN has rehoused in Rwanda safely 30,000 refugees from other countries?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I'm very glad that he asks about what's happened in the last decade. Because let's not forget that just 6 years ago, 11 refugees were shot dead by the Rwandan police for protesting about food shortages, as reported by the UN. So I thank the honourable member for that point, because I think he makes the point clearly for me, that 6 years ago, 11 refugees were shot dead. I'd welcome his comments on that point. Does he want to intervene again?
There's 30,000. I'm sorry about that incident, but the 30,000 refugees. 30,000 refugees. 30,000 refugees have been safely. 30,000 refugees have been safely rehoused in Rwanda. It is deemed to be safe by the United Nations. It is deemed to be safe by pretty much everybody apart from the Labour Party. That is the point.
The whole point of this is that we do not have a crystal ball in this House. The evidence of what happened 6 years ago should clearly give us some cause for concern. All that this amendment seeks to do is create a position whereby the Independent Monitoring Committee, handpicked by the government, is able to advise the Home Secretary on laying a statement, and that is absolutely fair enough. So I simply cannot... I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I was listening carefully to the intervention that he took that referred to the last decade and the 30,000. But of course, is my honourable friend aware that within the past 12 months, the UK has accepted a refugee from Rwanda?
I thank my honourable friend, and it's not just one refugee. Many refugees are taken from Rwanda to this country, which really does beg the question as to how safe that country can be. But all the amendment seeks to do is trust but verify. It puts a mechanism in place which is the kind of mechanism which is embedded in thousands and thousands of pieces of legislation that are on the statute book. So I simply cannot understand why the government can't simply accept this amendment and enable the Home Secretary to allay a statement on whether or not Rwanda is safe or unsafe. That would provide important safeguards, and of course it is not in any way a wrecking amendment, just like all of the other amendments that the government has rejected. They do not prevent flights from taking off. Madam Deputy Speaker, at his press conference this morning, the Prime Minister boasted about the progress that he's supposedly been making to stop the Tory small boats chaos. And yet, as he stood at that very lectern, it emerged that small boat crossings have increased by 24% compared to the same period last year. Next, he refused to give details about the operationalisation of the Rwanda scheme, saying that, and I quote, "we will not be giving away sensitive operational detail which could hinder all the progress made to date." Or so he thought, because it subsequently emerged that one of his ministers had left behind under some chairs in the front row a secret document entitled Official Sensitive, which included, wait for it, operational details of how the scheme will work. You simply could not make it up, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yet another day of chaos, empty boasts and shambolic incompetence. But to be fair to the Prime Minister, there was one point he made in his press conference that we on these benches did agree with. In response to a question from the media, he clearly stated that the test for this policy will not be whether a few symbolic flights take off, as his former friend and the Immigration Minister had previously said, the former Immigration Minister, but, in the Prime Minister's words, success is when the boats have been stopped. Well, that's how he wants to be judged, and that, I can assure the House, is how we on these benches will judge him and how the public will judge him too. For 2 years now, we've been urging the Prime Minister to stop the boasts and instead start stopping the Tory boats' chaos. But sadly, he has chosen to ignore us on both fronts. Instead, we need Labour's plan to redirect the Rwanda money into a cross-border police unit, to smash the criminal gangs upstream, and a returns and enforcement unit to remove those who have no right to be here, reversing the decline in removals that we have seen under this government. Because only Labour's plan can fix our country's broken asylum system. And only Labour's plan can restore order at our border. Those benches opposite, they don't want to hear it, but that is the reality of the situation that we're in, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you very much, and I hope that every member opposite will join me in the division lobbies this evening.
Buckland.
It was going so well, and then it descended into a second reading diatribe from a Labour opposition that has absolutely nothing to say about the serious challenge of immigration, pretends that it will do what this government's doing, only slightly better, but doesn't really approach the level of events and the seriousness of the issue that we need to trouble. It is a blank page that we face on the other side of the House. Let's just deal very briefly then with the issue that we have left. I still think that there is strong merit in what their lordships say about not just the way in which we designate Rwanda to be a safe country, but the way in which, if in future things change, we have a parliamentary mechanism to deal with it. It does seem to me that in the absence of this amendment, there would be the need for further primary legislation in future, which I don't think is a great place for the government to end up. However, I do think that in the context of where we are with the detailed consideration of Lord's amendments, there does come a time when I think the unelected House does have to cede to the authority of the elected House. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are now approaching that moment. And whilst I don't resile at all in any way from the merits of the argument, I think in looking at the bigger picture and remembering the balance that we have to strike here, and also, frankly, thinking ahead as to what future governments might end up, hopefully not of a different complexion to our own, but of the balance that we need to strike between both houses, I do judge that now is probably the time for us to... I will give way.
Wouldn't the right honourable member's argument have more weight about whether their lordships should cave in if this actually had any mandate from the people? But this wasn't mentioned in a general election. It wasn't in a manifesto. It's not the will of the people.
I think the honourable gentleman's argument has merit about Salisbury-Addison when it comes to the principle of a bill, and I think that their lordships have absolutely the leeway to deal with it in the way that they have, on the basis that it wasn't in a manifesto. He's not wrong about that, but there is a more fundamental point about the way in which the balance between both houses has to be maintained. Now, this is the 4th round of ping-pong. I think the record is 7. This is a short bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I remember bills much more lengthy than this, for example, the EU withdrawal bill, where we only had 2 rounds of ping-pong on that occasion, because I think, in the end, the other House did respect the primacy of this place. And however reluctantly I feel about this, however conflicted I feel about the issue, I do think that we have reached that moment, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to vote against the Lord's amendment, but I will consider my position as to whether I vote in favour of it on this occasion. But I do say this to my right honourable learned friend, to the government, that I think getting ourselves in a position where we've had 4 rounds of ping-pong on a bill as short as this is not a great place to be with respect to him. And I do think that had the government made some other concessions, as it's now properly done on the Afghan question, as it did on the modern-day slavery question, then perhaps we wouldn't have had to wait this long at this late hour, and goodness knows perhaps to a later hour, before making those concessions. I just remind my honourable friends that I do think that Lord's amendments are not about the principle of the bill, they're about the detail of scrutiny, and that I think in the spirit that he's approached these amendments, I think it would have been wiser that we'd reached this position slightly earlier. But that's the only criticism I offer at this stage, and the principle now of the bill is settled, and the will of this House should prevail.
SNP spokesperson Alison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise again on the this awful bill to put the SNP's opposition to it on record. We do not support the state-sponsored people trafficking bill on Rwanda, and we will oppose it in any way that we can. And I must say I was quite disappointed to hear the Labour Lords caving on the Afghan amendment through in the Lord. And if they think that this is some kind of concession, I've got some magic beans to sell them, honestly, it's pathetic. And the journalist from The Independent, who has done so much work to expose the weaknesses of the government's Afghan schemes, she says, Holly Bancroft says, this review is already happening and it's only for Afghans with links to specialist units. The Home Office is saying they won't deport the triples granted leave to remain in the UK by the MOD who came here irregularly, but the number of people in this situation will be very small.
Hear, hear.
Before I came into the chamber, I was phoned by Councillor Abdul Bastani of Glasgow Afghan United because he wanted to know what was happening in this place, and he wanted to know what protections there will be for the Afghans that he is in constant contact with. He wants to know what happens to the journalists, what happens to the interpreters, what happens to the women and children, the people who put their lives in danger to safeguard the UK's mission in Afghanistan, to their children, to their families. He says those people who are the UK left behind, he says nobody is listening to them, nobody is replying. The safe and legal routes are not there. I will give way.
I make this point for I want it recorded and answered. It's very important. My constituent Trevor Young worked for the British Army in Afghanistan. Alongside him worked his comrade and his friend in Afghani, who happens to be in Pakistan because he had to leave Afghanistan because of threats to him and his wife and his children. Police have removed his phone. He's under a deportation from Pakistan back to Afghanistan. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is so important for my constituent, and I have to say to the Minister in particular, Minister, my constituent has his friend, Afghani, a soldier, has been forgotten about by this British government and by the Minister, and because of that I have to make a plea for him, because he isn't covered within this legislation.
I thank him, and he's quite right to point this out in the way that he has. And it's been further reported in The Independent, an Afghan intelligence analyst who worked alongside members of the RAF but has been threatened with removal to Rwanda. He says, and I quote, "I call on the Prime Minister and the Government to stand by the promise made during the fall of Kabul. If the legal ways, such as ARAP and ACRS, were actually working, people like me wouldn't have to wait for years just for a response and wouldn't be forced into taking a small boat to come to the UK. Being in limbo is nothing but a waste of the UK's resources. I have skills to contribute to the UK's economy and tax system, but I have to rely on Home Office help because I cannot work." There are thousands in his position. I further had an email from a person who emails me quite regularly. I don't know if this person ever gets a response from the ARAP email that he emails and the other people that he copies into this. But I see these emails that come in, and I read these emails that come in, and I think it's in tribute to Syed, who is constantly seeking some safety, that I would read this. He says, "You caused me to miss the evacuation flights. Why should I be in this situation? It's all because of you. I can't endure it anymore. I am tired and I'm faced with so many challenges. It happened several times today that I had to stop myself with difficulty, crying in the middle of the street. Everyone was looking at me. I cannot endure it anymore." And these are the people that have been left behind by this bill and now left behind by the Labour Party, who would not press this amendment yet further. Moving to the remaining amendment that we have, from all the amendments that we have.
Yes.
I'm sorry, am I boring the members opposite? Do they want to pop back out to the Prime Minister's office and have some drinks instead of listening to the important cases being put in this debate? They care so little. What we are asking, and
order. I'm just anxious the honourable lady addresses the amendment in front of us. Alison Thewliss.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am addressing the amendment in front of us. Now, what this amendment seeks to do is a very small concession to this place, that this place here should have some kind of scrutiny over whether Rwanda remains a safe country. The folk over on the benches opposite were all about taking back control, but when it comes to scrutiny of the treaties and the obligations we're signing up to, they couldn't give a hoot. It's quite clear. Now, all that we are asking for in this amendment, all that the Lords are asking for in this amendment, is that some assurances now and in the future that there will be scrutiny as to whether Rwanda is indeed a safe country. That is not asking too much. Now, what I would like to know from the Government is they say that they will be ready to remove people in 10 to 12 weeks. And the Government has said that Rwanda will be safe when the treaty is in force. So can I ask, will all the matters of implementation be in force in 10 to 12 weeks? Will the policies be in place in 10 to 12 weeks? Will the staff be in place in 10 to 12 weeks? Will the judges be in place in 10 to 12 weeks? Will the lawyers be in place in 10 to 12 weeks? Will the appeals system be in place in 10 to 12 weeks? Will all of these things be there? Will the accommodation be there in 10 to 12 weeks? Because we know they've already sold it off. And what airline company have they contracted to remove people in 10 to 12 weeks? Because they have been extremely unclear about whether they even have an airline company, and they have not told us that. This House deserves to know, because we are not going to get the opportunities again to scrutinise the Government on whether or not the Rwanda Treaty is actually being implemented. And I think that's the very least that this House should be able to do, to be able to keep a check on the Government and on future governments as to whether or not they are fulfilling the obligations that they carried out. Because we know that even when this treaty was being negotiated, that Rwanda were engaging in refoulement of people. So if that was happening when the treaty was being negotiated, is it still happening now? Can the Minister give any assurances that Rwanda is not refouling people right now? And if he cannot come to the dispatch box and give that assurance, we should not be passing these we should not be rejecting these Lords' amendments and approving this bill this evening. This bill has been very unusual in the number of Lords' amendments that we have had, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've never seen the like. Now, I don't believe in the House of Lords. It's a principal position of the SNP not to send people to an unelected chamber. But this Westminster system is broken when the supposed revising chamber has been ignored throughout the entire process of this bill. A revising chamber is supposed to be allowed to revise, but yet this Government has ignored every single reasonable amendment that the House of Lords has made. It's exactly the same as when the bill is introduced as when it will come out of this process. And this elected House has absolutely no mandate for this bill. It was in no manifesto. The Prime Minister does not have a mandate for it, and this House has no business approving, and I support the Lords in rejecting it. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is not a deterrent. It has not been a deterrent. Nothing they have done has been a deterrent. It will not work. It will pile misery on top of people who have already suffered incredible trauma that the folk crowing in the benches opposite cannot even imagine. It does not happen in Scotland's name, and we will vote against it on every opportunity we will get.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3J. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3J. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Joy Morrissey and Mark Jenkinson. Tellers for the noes, Tonya Antoniazzi and Mary Glindon. Thank you. Order.
The ayes to the right were 312. The noes to the left were 237.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 237. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Minister to move that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons.
I beg to move that a committee be appointed to draw up a reason to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendment. That Michael Tomlinson, Scott Mann, Kieran Mullen, James Sunderland, Stephen Kinnock, Colleen Fletcher and Alison Thewliss be members of the committee. That Michael Tomlinson be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee. And that the committee do withdraw immediately.
Yeah. The question is that a committee be appointed to draw up a reason to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their Amendment 3J. That Michael Tomlinson, Scott Mann, Kieran Mullen, James Sunderland, Stephen Kinnock, Colleen Fletcher and Alison Thewliss be members of the committee. That Michael Tomlinson be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee. That the committee do withdraw immediately. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division, clear the lobby. Sorry, Liam, can I say that the question is that a reasons committee be appointed along the lines as I've just set out. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. Tell us for the ayes, Joy Morrissey and Mark Jenkinson. Tell us for the noes, Peter Grant and Stephen Bonner. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 309. The noes to the left, 41.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 309. The noes to the left, 41. So the ayes have it, unlocked. Order. That concludes consideration of the Lord's message received today relating to the safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill. The House may be called upon to consider a further Lord's message later today, if necessary, and I am suspending the sitting to await any such message from the Lords. The bells will ring before the House resumes. Order. Order.